and change.
Yeah, like looking for a car manager. Interesting. Credit? Yeah, that sounds good. Pretty kismet timing.
I don't know what made me say that.
Maybe it's no, oh, I do. No, I have your phone number. Yeah, and if it's not my old phone,
Hello. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming out in community tonight. Want to once again acknowledge we're on the traditional territory of the Cowichan tribes. Also need to thank the Dean of Social Sciences who sponsored this event tonight. And also going to pass off to Cody here to say a little bit on Collective Earth and some of what we've been working on in the last week since we saw such a big longing for connections. So yeah.
Thanks. Welcome, and yeah, we've got a lot of outreach about the Collective Earth platform, and just wanted to update about that and what we talked about with creating forums and helping people connect. So we've been working with a few people, like Bree, to get the platform online. So it's on the website right now at www.collective.earth, and you can create a membership there and fill out. There's a form that fills out your needs and your gifts and what you're looking to create in community, and some of the things you'd like to connect with people on. So if anyone's interested in that, from there there's the ability to create groups and forums to get people chatting, and we'll also be able to link through the newsletter and connect for future events. So it's all in beta test right now. It's functioning, so definitely check it out if you're interested. And afterwards, after the event, if you'd like to know a bit more or talk about that stuff, just come up and find me, and we'll do a little circle about that, and just get people connected on all these different projects that are going on here in the Valley.
Yeah, and welcoming Jack Anderson this evening. Jack Anderson is president and founder of Green Plan since 2001. 15 years of experience working with provincial and local government agencies, including the City of Nanaimo and the Regional District of Nanaimo. Registered professional planner and certified member of the Planning Institute of BC. Green Plan's focus is the design, planning, and construction of sustainable homes and green neighborhoods. Jack has contributed to a number of exciting green initiatives in the Central Vancouver Island region in recent years, including the planning and processes for villages at Providence Farm, serving as an agent for the zoning amendments applications for our Eco Village, Cherry Point Marina, Salmon Beach near Hewlett, a land share initiative in Haida Gwaii and Kirkstone Place, and a model sustainable neighborhood project in Cedar. So lots of wonderful information. And I welcome Jack. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lacey. First of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to share. This is a topic area that's very dear to my heart, and I always look for opportunities to share on that. I'm not the gifted speaker that our dear colleague Guy is last week, so we will fumble around a little bit harder on that. But I do want to mention that I'm fifth generation born on this island, coming on the second boat of settlers that came to settle in the Nanaimo area. But I actually spent from the age of 3 to 16 as a youth in Duncan here growing up. So this community is as equally important to me as anything up island, but I see a very important value in making sure that this part sets precedent for us all in moving forwards towards creating something for our great grandchildren so they can live as comfortably in this amazing part of the world as I've been fortunate to have. So I want to share a little bit about my passion and where that came from. So I want to tell you a little bit of a story here. Definitely working.
Use the down keys, maybe?
So, as mentioned, I grew up on central Vancouver Island, and as a young boy, I loved getting out into the wild and swimming in the Cowichan River and camping in Nitnat and living in this part of the world, and it was pristine, and it just seemed like this was the life. This was what it was all about. And I went off to university to a environmentally focused architectural program at the University of Manitoba. And it was very exciting. It was quite a prestigious school. I was very lucky to be connected to it. And I remember one day in particular where my favorite professor said, you know, in an auditorium much like this with 120 students, and he said, I'm going to show you a video today that's going to change your life. And so we all sat down, and of course we all like videos when we're students. So I remember we sat down to a video called The Limits to Growth by the Club of Rome, which was a group out of MIT that was using computers about the size of this room to do calculations and simulations on what the impact of humans was on the planet. And it was all done with disturbing industrial images, heavy organ music, very, very frightening stuff. And you can see some of the graphs here that are showing what the impacts were to our pristine world, and including the population dropping in this century now, and it was extremely disturbing to me. And I remember that when the video was over, I staggered out of the conference hall, and I walked out, and I felt like someone had hit me over the head with a stick. And I walked up to two of my buddies, and they were standing there, and I said, "What are we going to do?" And they said, "Well, we're going to go for a beer." And I said, "No, I'm talking about that video." I says, "You know, what are we going to do? How do we address this?" And they said, "Forget about it. It doesn't impact us." And off we went. And so this stayed with me for a long time. As much as I was disturbed by this video, I was disturbed by the reaction of my colleagues. And years later, I was fortunate to go to York University, and I was studying in a master's program there. And it was an opportunity to study in whatever area you were interested in. And so I was studying ecological community design in 1980. Whoops, I dated myself. And so one of the courses I was taking was called Attitude Change, Social Change. And we were going through a course talking about all the different things that changed attitudes in our society. And at the end of the course, we had to do a term paper. And so I came back to remembering this video, and I got access to a high school class. It was the wife of one of the professors at the university. And so I was able to go into that high school class. It was a grade 11 class, and I came in and I said, okay, you know, I'm going to share a couple of days with you guys. So I said, but first of all, before we get started, I'm going to give you a questionnaire. And this is just simply your opinion. So everybody gets an A on this questionnaire because your opinion is what it is. And so you're all correct in that. So they filled out this questionnaire, and the questionnaire had a variety of questions that were I totally disagree to, I totally agree. And they had questions around, do you think that climate will ever impact your lifestyle? Do you think that acid rain will ever be a concern? Acid rain was the popular topic of concern and pollution in the Toronto area at the time. And so the students filled out these 20 questions, and I happily collected these questionnaire and I put it off to one side. And then I said, okay, well, we're going to show you a video. Well, a big cheer goes up for a bunch of grade 11s because videos they love. So I showed them the Limits to Growth video with the heavy organ music and the doomsday scenarios and the whole works. And there was a lot of quiet people in there. And I said, okay, before we finish this day, I'm going to give you a copy of the same questionnaire all over again. And I want you to fill it out and show me how you feel now. And so they filled out that questionnaire. When I took it back to my apartment, I looked at it, and questionnaire A and questionnaire B, the sets were virtually identical. There had been no shift in attitudes during that video, which concurred with my two buddies that wanted to go for a beer, as I recalled. And so I was quite, a little bit surprised, but I was somewhat anticipating that. So I came back 2 weeks later, and in order to be scientific, I said, you guys have had 2 weeks to sleep on this, so I want you to fill out the questionnaire again. And so effectively, I then had A, B, and C, and they were all identical. There had been no shift whatsoever in attitudes. So I then said, okay, I'm going to show you another video. Got a huge round of boos from the class, and a few of them yelling at me saying, we don't want to watch any more of your videos. I said, I think you'll like this one. And it was a video by the New Alchemists, which was a group out of Cape Cod that John and Nancy Todd were involved in. And I don't know if many of you know who John and Nancy Todd are, but they were the ones that coined the term ecological design, which was in many ways the North American parallel to permaculture that came out of Australia at the time. And so this video showed this community of people living completely in harmony with organic farming, with passive solar. One of the neat images I remember was showing how their houses backed up against greenhouses, and in the greenhouses they had a lot of heat coming in there, so in order to temper that, they had big tanks of water for thermal mass, and they had tilapia swimming around in there that they were feeding with garden waste in there, and then they were flushing that water over their gardens, and they were getting amazing yields out of it, and they were using windmills and solar panels in its infancy for all of their energy needs within it. So it was an amazing video that showed it, and it's at the end of it, as the credits are rolling down and the community is skinny dipping in the local creek, you know, the students were, you know, quite excited. And I said, okay, I'm going to give you this questionnaire one more time. And so I gave them the fourth questionnaire, and they filled it out. There was a radical shift in opinion at that point, which confirmed for me what I had read through some of Joanna Macy's work on repression of information when it is disturbing. And effectively, humans have this psychological ability to repress information when they feel they don't have any way to affect it. So it disturbs them, so they repress that. So you either repress it or you become depressed. And I think maybe when I'd seen that video the first time, I was working on the depression side, not wanting to go for a beer and repressing it. So very interesting. But what it told me is that I needed to spend my life making examples of the positive alternative that everyone could see. And that opportunity to see that positive alternative, sustainable communities, is the best way that we can impact our society so that we can, in fact, have a sustainable world for our great-grandchildren ahead of us. So in that, my passion has not been to stand on a block in the middle of the park and wave at everybody and tell them the sky is falling every Saturday, because I knew it would be meaningless. But I've spent as much of my life working with people to try to create examples that others can witness and then take that going forward. And that's going to come back in my conversation here today. So I wanted to just share where my passion started from and who I am. So this is my game plan here tonight, is to talk in these various ways. First of all, a very brief discussion about creating the vision. What are we working towards? And I know many of you here have hopes to be able to be part of a sustainable community in some form. So creating that vision, we'll talk a little bit about that. The biggie one here is red tape, you know, getting from A to Z. And by my good fortune of having worked for local government, and worked with local government on the other side of the counter, I have a unique perspective to understand both aspects of that. And I also live in the dual disciplines of the planning side and the design side. So both of that is all, helps to put me where I am today and what I have to share. So we're going to talk a little bit about it, and it's a bit dry, so if anybody dozes off, there won't be, nobody's going to throw a piece of chalk at you or anything. So, we're going to talk then about the difference about what sustainable communities are all about, because there's certain elements relative to sustainable communities, and we'll have a bit of a conversation on that. We'll talk about the hurdles of being a trailblazer, and Lacey and others have approached me mentioning the interest in seeing where this tiny home movement is going to. So I've done a little bit of research, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the issues and challenges associated with the tiny home community, and potentially some solutions as to how we move that forward. I'm going to have my dear colleague Brandy share some insights about our eco-village process, because as mentioned, I was fortunate to work with Brandy to approach the CBRD and get a zoning amendment for the first eco-village in Canada. And so, you know, the personal experience, Brandy's willing to share some thoughts on that. And then we will have some questions and answers in there. I'm likely to try and find a break somewhere in here just because it might be a bit dry at times. So that's the game plan. So when we talk about creating a vision, the first, aspect of it is inspiration. What inspires us? The opportunity, as we know, that the eco-village is able to be present for many of us to experience. How many here in this room have been to our eco-village at some point? So that's the majority. And those that haven't, make a point of going there. There's thousands of people that go through there all the time, and you're seeing all kinds of innovation and stuff. So that creates that inspiration. Many of you might recognize that wheel up in the top corner. How many know what that represents there? So, okay, that's the permaculture wheel, and it's a symbolic aspect in there. But these are different projects. Many of them I had a hand in. Some of them I didn't, obviously, but they represent different things that you might have seen along the way and been inspired. Hey, I want to be in a tiny home. I want to do something unique in that way. So, we have the opportunity of inspiration. The second aspect of that is that if you're thinking community, you need to share that. You need to share that with others and find out who else is inspired. So you need to have a shared vision. You need to create that. And that comes through events like this and being able to talk and find out that there are like-minded people like yourself, who share those sorts of ideas. We then want to get into making a commitment, because that's a huge aspect that we deal with, and things change for people. I'm working with a group up in Haida Gwaii. They have had trouble finding property for individuals up there, so they collectively want to buy a large piece of property and then live on it communally. And in the process it's taken to get through zoning amendments and development permits and strata subdivision, in their case, a number of them have fallen off from the original group that I worked with. And they weren't ones just for reasons of disconnect with the rest of the group. They had personal things come up in their life where they had to go and take care of family members and such. So, be aware that when you're trying to get a commitment out of people, that things will change, and you need to structure in exiting strategies for people and how you welcome other people in, and how you make decisions as a group and stuff. And I don't want to go into great depth. We could spend the whole talk on that. Once you've got that commitment, etc., then it's all about finding that piece of land and being able to move forward with that piece of land and making that happen. So there's lots of unique opportunities there, and a big part of where we're going next is to talk about what we do when we found a piece of land and we want to make it happen. So this is what we call the red tape aspect of it. And a lot of people, they go and they have a conversation with the planners, and by the time they walk out of there, they're going, oh, there's no hope. How are we ever going to be able to make this happen? And it can be very frustrating and discouraging for folks to be able to feel that they can get through it. And so, you've got to understand that this red tape is just process that we need to entertain. And I'm going to walk through process and explain a lot of it to you in there. For instance, some people, what we need to do is you can't just go and create a community on any piece of property. Zoning exists for a reason. And I'll share with you a little bit that when I was a planner with the regional district in Nanaimo, the Coombs, Hilliers, Arrington area, which is area F of the regional district in Nanaimo, had no zoning, and people went, wow, this is perfect. What a great situation. And I'll never forget the woman that came to the front counter one day, and she's bags under her eyes, she's in tears, she's got 3 kids, they're all crying, and they're there, and she's telling me that her single wide mobile, which is a little bit closer to the property line than she really wanted it, is directly adjacent a fellow who had decided to do helicopter repair. And so helicopter repair with no zoning, you do it wherever you want. So they were landing helicopters in the middle of the night from all over the place, and every time it did, it would lift her trailer and shake it, and everybody would cry, and so she said, you know, you can't let them do that. And I said, there's no zoning, ma'am. You know, as long as there's no zoning, you can do anything you want. In that community, they had the school. Next door to the school, a guy opened a sawmill. Can you imagine the chaos that that presented for them as well? So zoning didn't exist in places like that, and so there is good reason for it because land uses aren't always compatible. And so there is means by which we can seek the appropriate uses within them. Now, official community plans. How many here know what an OCP is? Oh, good. I'll share it for those. But official community plan is the one time every 10 years where the community gets a chance to come together and talk about how they see the future of what their community is going to look like. And so they're able to get into all different kinds of issues that are associated with that. I sat on the official community plan steering committee for electoral area A of the regional district in Nanaimo. It was a 3-year process, 50 meetings in total. This is the document that was created, but there's some amazing direction in here. And when you create an official community plan, it provides direction not only for the community in the discussions, but it also becomes the document that the planners in a planning department must look at on a regular basis. So in their situation, if someone comes in and says, I would like to rezone this property for this use, the first thing they do is they put through the OCP and say, okay, well, let's see, that property is designated this in the OCP. Yes, the community foresees that use as being appropriate in there. We will support you for your zoning amendment application. So you need to understand what your official community plan has in mind for the long-term use of it, because it directs what the zoning can change when we actually get into the process of it. Development permits. These are other aspects that are written into an official community plan, and a development permit is intended not as an opportunity for a planning department to say yes or no to a project. It's the opportunity to regulate the form in which that development moves forward. So a lot of development permits are around things like environmental protection, protecting sensitive ecosystems, protecting wetlands, etc. So there's a development permit on that. There's development permits around hazardous lands. If there's areas where you've got steep slopes and stuff, they want people to be set back a certain distance. So they put regulations in there to say, if you want to develop on this property, this is what we want you to do. And so you go through this development permit process with the local government as part of the zoning amendment later on. Other types of development permits that you look at are farmland protection. So protecting farmland becomes an important one in there. Floodplain protection, so when we know that the river may rise and flood, you know, that people aren't too close to it. So that is another one. And then when you get into commercial, industrial, or multifamily, there's an allowance for what they call form and character development permits. And this is where the regional district gets its say in what the character of the building is, what the landscaping, the signage, the parking, the lighting, those aspects are regulated through a development permit. And they basically, as I said, it's not a yes or no, just that we would like you to do it this way and let's work together. And then when we comply and the development permit is passed, then you can get your building permit. But up until then, building permits can't be issued. One other one, and this is very unique, and I just want to talk about a development permit that is in the Area A OCP. And out in Yellow Point, the water, the groundwater there is over what's called the Yellow Point Aquifer, and it is there's now a development permit in there, and effectively what they determined is that the amount of groundwater and the ability of it to recharge, because instead of being a large gravel bed like we have under the Cassidy Airport, it's fissures in rocks, much like it is under all the Gulf Islands. And so when you draw water from there, and it takes a while for it to recharge. So it can be really a challenge for your water supply in areas like that. So they established a development permit there, very unique. that says that anybody building a brand new home must put in a rainwater harvesting system. So isn't that interesting that we're actually seeing the government using a development permit to encourage a sustainability act in itself? So other aspects of your red tape are that even though you're working with the local government, which is the municipality, regional district, etc., you often have additional applications going through provincial regulations. If you are in the agricultural land reserve, then you need to go through the Agricultural Land Commission and get permission for their, the Agricultural Land Commission to get permission. In order that you are allowed to do certain things. So it's very interesting because if you look at a rural forward zone in the RDN, the area I'm most familiar with, it says that in a 5-acre piece of property, you're allowed 2 houses. But the Agricultural Land Commission says that if you're on ALR, you're allowed 1 house and will give you a single-wide mobile if you can justify you need that for farm help. And so when you effectively look at it, you've got one set of rules from the RDN, you've got another set from the Agricultural Land Commission, you look through it, and the worst case scenario takes precedence in making the decision about what you can and can't do there. So sometimes, even though the zoning looks like it's an easy one, you end up against a provincial agency. We also have to concern ourselves with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, which often triggers such aspects as subdivision, whether you're going strata or what type of ownership that you're going to be working towards, and even issues such as where your access comes in off of highways. So you have additional ones there. If you're involving a community septic field, we're talking with Island Health, and we have to jump through their hoops as well. You know, there is the Ministry of Environment that will have concerns with any kind of a wetland or a stream, and the fact that we sometimes have to go through those regulations as well. So when you start lining all of these rules up, you know, as we often refer to it, you feel a little bit like a circus animal because you're just constantly jumping through hoop after hoop after hoop, and some of them are interrelated, and so you jump through one and it's actually contrary to what the other one is doing. So during the process of going through zoning amendments and stuff, they reach out to one another, all of these different agencies, to the provincial agencies, and they speak through referrals to First Nations, to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, and they're always asking, what is your opinion of this? You know, are you supportive of this? And quite often, you'll have concurrent applications to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure and the regional district in Nanaimo over something, and they each refer each other, you know, and so they're each waiting for one or the other to speak about how they want to do it before they are willing to speak. So sometimes you got to drag them all together in one room and say, hey, let's talk about what we're actually doing. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because that's one of the hurdles of doing things that are unprecedented. So that becomes an aspect, but one of the other referrals is actually done through community. And so many electoral areas have an APC, an Advisory Planning Committee, and that committee is a group of citizens that the director has chosen and said, please come together and talk about these applications and give us your feedback. And so in some situations, they can be harder to deal with than the regional board that is actually making the decision. So an APC is another group, but it's very interesting. It's not mandated by the Local Government Act that you must have it. So the Cowichan Valley Regional District has an APC in every electoral area, to my knowledge. The Regional District of Nanaimo has none. They don't do that. They don't feel that the citizens need to give them any advice towards whether this is a good idea or not. I make no judgment. So the Advisory Planning Committee becomes one more hoop to go through, and it usually comes in early in the process there as well. And of course, we have our boards and councils that make the decision. And we're going to talk a little bit more. This is the dry part coming up about actual zoning amendment processes and what they must do under the Local Government Act. And then once all of that's done, then we get into the fun part of the building codes. And the building codes are good except that they're constantly moving. And so you're working on something and charging along, everything looks good, and the goalpost just got moved over here because they've changed the rules on what is considered acceptable and what isn't under it. So in 2012, for instance, they upgraded the BC Building Code to make it so that every home must be much more seismically sound. And so we have much higher standards for the ability to withstand the big shaker that is ahead of us at some point. 2 years later, they changed the requirements for energy efficiency in the BC Building Code. So now we must be much more efficient in that. And that has implications on what your planning and stuff may be as well. So the building codes become another challenge, and nobody's allowed to get your building permit until all the planning issues are sorted out. So that is a little bit of the red tape that we all must jump through at some point here. So there it is. This is the one that I was afraid to show you, but and I had to squeeze so many words on there. I was afraid nobody would be able to see it from the back there, but is it visible at all, or yeah, reasonable? Thank you.
How much chalk do you have?
Pardon me?
How much chalk do you have?
Yeah. Well, this is what's going to put a few of you to sleep, and I'll try to be brief about it and share a few stories. There's a couple of interesting slides along the way here. So as we talked about, every project starts with a vision. It's a group of people saying, hey, you know what? We should make this happen. How are we going to do this? And so, they get themselves into, well, what should we do next? Well, one of the first things you need to do is you need to go and have a conversation with the local government in which the property that you're interested in is located, because you need to know how they look at it. You need to get them to give you some feedback on what the OCP is saying. You need to get some sense as to how many hurdles you've got to jump through, because many of them require you to spend a lot of money. Discover that your vision, as exciting as it is to you, doesn't have a hope in heck of ever happening in that area, and that you might need to think about a different location for it. So you can start early with some preliminary discussions around that. So then we get into a really unique process called the charrette. And I've done a number of charrettes, and they're a very exciting aspect. There's a charrette that was done for the Kirkstone project, Model Sustainable Neighborhood, which, by the way, in the development of the official community plan, in the recognition of the different land uses in there, they designated 8.5 acre piece of property to be a model sustainable neighborhood. So this has no other choice but to be developed that way. So they're offering a significant increase in density in order for it to work, but it is done so long as you meet all of the requirements within that OCP for it to be a model sustainable neighborhood. So we said, okay, well, let's bring this together. So we decided, let's get the charrette happening. And the charrette is really interesting because it has three significant purposes. First of all, it has an opportunity to engage the community and to be able to have people from your community where this is going to be located be excited about it. Is also an opportunity for what we call buy-in. Because when people have an opportunity to get engaged in something early, then they can become much more a backer of that project going forward, and that becomes critical when we go back to that zoning amendment process in there. And then the third aspect is that it's brainstorming, and you are going to be able to get all kinds of great ideas that come out of just that exciting process of bringing people together that are thinking outside the box about what we could possibly do. So I've done charrettes for Providence Farm, where we had a charrette, this was for the Village at Providence Farm initiative that was a number of years ago, where we had just the people that were involved in Providence Farm, and they did a charrette, and then we reached out to the greater community, and in that, we want to bring in the immediate neighbors and give them a chance to participate in this, because they're the ones that may be most affected, and if they're involved in it, they're going to have a better buy-in into it. You want to reach out to other people, particularly people that are vocal and active in your community, and say, hey, why don't you come and join us? And then you can also reach out and you can invite members of the jurisdictions that are there. So in that, I've done a charrette for Samaritan House, which is an outreach by a nonprofit society in Nanaimo for women fleeing domestic abuse. And in that situation, we invited the RCMP into that charrette. And we invited the social planner for the city of Nanaimo. And so we had them giving us their input into what would make sense, what they would see as supportable. So by the time you do this, you actually are coming in with a whole variety of really good ideas. And another group that you want to reach out and invite in your charrette process are experts. So if you can bring someone in who's got expertise in renewable energy, or you've got someone who knows something about alternative septic, or knows something about environmental protection, or urban farming. These were all part of this group that you're seeing in here. There's a number of permaculturalists in there, and although not present in this image because she left early, was Brandy. She joined us as well and brought her insights of our eco-village to this group in the process of that. So a charrette goes through it's usually like a one-day event, and you want to start it by giving people some background information. So you send this out by email in advance, and you give them a chance to get familiar with the site and what's going on, and give them a little bit on some of what the existing zoning OCPs say, etc. in there. Then you want to, the second aspect of it is that you usually do some sort of inspirational aspect to get people excited about the process and the day. And understand that in a charrette, there's a couple of fundamental rules. One is that everybody has to have fun. And anybody that speaks and shares their idea, it's against the rules to stand up and say, oh, that's a bad idea, I don't like that one. You know, you get up and you add more, but you don't discourage anyone from speaking. So this is always done as a very positive, exciting, brainstorming in, and you want to keep people engaged and active. So in that, once you've got people inspired about it, then in the morning we go into breakout groups. So we usually identify 3 or 4 critical topic areas with 3 or 4 questions, and we ask them to, okay, this group gets together and we ask what group you want to sit in. And so we talked about the social aspects of living in Kirkstone. And so one breakout group spoke about housing and the form of housing and the demographics of housing, and how it needs to reach out to people of all income brackets, etc. And so this group at the top here represents one of those breakout groups and the conversations that went around that as they sort of filled that out. Then we end up usually having a meal. Well, actually, we always do a summary of each of the groups, so they can stand up and say, our group spoke, these are the questions that were posed to us, and these are the feelings that we have. And so they provide some answers, and then everybody gets educated about each of the topic areas that way. And then we usually have a meal together, and then we go into the afternoon session, which is a lot of fun, because this is where we go back to kindergarten. And we throw in blank sheets of paper with the shape of the property on it, and maybe a few elements like where the wetland is or the water course runs through it or other aspects. And we say, get involved here, get your color pencils out here and start doodling collectively as a group. So that's what's going on in this bottom one here. And then you can see the outcome of that in the middle here with one of the images. So we usually get one member of each group to sort of stand up and say, okay, this is what we did, and this is what we thought makes sense from a perspective of how this development could go forward. So that can be very exciting on the part of the individuals. So we start to see commonalities within that. This tends to be a very busy, exciting, you learn a ton in a day like this in the charrette. But what you're doing at the end of it is you've got a whole group of people that are very excited about seeing this project move forward. Keeps looking for my network and freezing this. Okay, back to that image again. So that's where we were with the charrette. So we ended up, you know, in a situation like that where you've got 4 or 5 graphics that have been created. And so we take those back And we sit down with the owners of the property and we say, okay, well, let's look these over. Where are these ideas? We look for the commonalities in it. We look for really unique ideas or things that have popped out from the works of it. And then from that, we use that as the basis on which we can develop a concept. Because you can't go forward with any kind of an application to a community or to a regional board or a city council unless they know what you're intending to do. How do they evaluate it? They can't give you just a blank, oh yeah, we'll approve you for whatever you feel like doing. They want to know specific about that. Ma'am, you've got a question.
You're using the term "we." Who's the "we"? Like, are you there as a planner? Are you there as some professional that this group has hired? And what would you call yourself then? You're a designer?
Thank you for that question, and I'll clarify that. When I say we, I'm usually talking about the owners that are behind the project. So there may be a steering committee if it's a group of people that are interested in doing this collectively in the context of a sustainable community. It's the people that own it, and they usually at that point have engaged with a few professionals. And as you will see there, on the far right there, it indicates professionals. And at that point, we start to recognize that the ability to create a concept can often be dictated by certain aspects. In the case of Kirkstone, we were looking at what we could do in terms of septic handling. So we engaged with a septic expert who came in, and we did a bunch of tests on the site to determine the permeability of it and what areas had to be saved for septic versus areas that we could actually do development of homes on, etc. So the team starts to form around that, but effectively you're going to create a concept that arises out of it. So there are some experts that are contributing to it, and quite often the group may, if they feel they can't carry it on their own, they may bring on an agent. And this is the role that I've played in probably about 8 to 10 projects around creating sustainable communities, going back to helping Brandy and the group from the Eco Village originally. So there's a concept that came out of a charrette. This is the Kirkstone project, and it shows what we had envisioned in there. You can see the big grass area in there that says fruit and nut tree orchard. That's actually where our septic is handled. We were looking at a biodigester at the time. Things have morphed, and we're now considering solar aquatics, but the area is still the same, and we have the ability to take the effluent of human waste and process it and then put it in drip irrigation underground, which could actually improve the yield of fruit and nut trees within there. It's not a good idea to use that in garden spaces where you're growing lettuce and carrots and things like that, but there are applications for it. So that became a significant aspect. The community center, the community commons as it's referred there, is identified. The neighborhood center, where we felt a food forest would work. Some clustering of houses, one-way streets that came out of that. Some of those ideas came from some of the preliminary work that we did by going to some of the agencies. So for instance, when we went to and told the approving officer for the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure that we wanted to do a model sustainable neighborhood, but we didn't want to do the conventional road construction, which is to define the middle of the road and then kill everything for 100 feet on each side, bulldoze it up, all the soil, topsoil, every worm that might be wiggling in there, and get rid of it. We wanted to minimize that. So he said, hey, if you are doing something sustainable, why don't you do it under the Gulf Island standards of strata? And if you do it under strata, I have no problem approving it. And you can do it on 12-foot wide roads of permeable pavers. So we're exploring that as an alternative. So some of those ideas came out of conversations between myself, the owners, and some of the approving authorities that we went to early in the process to get feedback. Likewise, when we spoke to the guy from Island Health about doing an alternative septic system, he actually came back and said, hey, I know the perfect dripper that you want to use because the roots of the trees can't get in it and plug them up. So this is really important that you consider this one. So it's funny how you've got these boogeymen out there that are in authoritative positions to say yes or no to your project that are actually very encouraging about wanting to see innovative ideas go forward. And I've had that experience over and over and over again. So this is an example of a concept that gets developed, and it becomes the basis on which you create your application. And provide a variety of additional drawings that support that. And so in that situation, sometimes you'll need a professional to do something that is at least professional graphics associated. Oh, here we are back to this again. So at that point, now that you've got your concept, you are actually putting together all of your detailed application materials in there. And so this is your filling out the forms and providing all the different documents that you need to submit. And in some cases, you anticipate what you think they're going to want. And so you present that into them. In our case, we knew that we were doing alternative septic, and because that's unique, we needed a report from the septic man. So we had the reports in our initial application. So we go in, and as you will see, when we go in for the OCP and zoning amendment, there's a little arrow that loops back because the planners like to look at that and say, oh yeah, no, this is good, this is good. Oh, no, we want you to do an aquifer assessment. Can you do an aquifer assessment for us? So we had to hire a geotech, and then the geotech had to come in and do a review and prepare a report and put a stamp on it, and that became, and then they said, okay, now we'll accept your application going forward. I'll talk more about that aspect later as we move forward. So in there, once it becomes an active application as an OCP or zoning amendment, we have referrals that are sent out to all kinds of agencies, Ministry of Environment, Highways, First Nations, anyone that they feel has any input, and they're given a period of time in which to respond. If you're doing things innovative, a huge challenge there is that all of a sudden an application comes onto the desk of someone and they looks at it and go, whoa, look at this. This is nothing like I've ever seen before. I don't know what to say, and they sort of bury it. So it can get lost for a while. So I actually, with the Regional District in Nanaimo on this project, I said, I know that many of your referral agencies are going to be spooked by this because they don't understand what we're doing here. So I will bring my experts in, you bring in all those referral agencies, and let's sit around a great big round table and we'll explain what we're doing. So the referral agencies can look across the table and say, well, gee, health is okay with this. So maybe we and environment are okay with this, and this is our conditions and concerns. So you can be creative about it as opposed to just wait for these referrals to go out, because some of them are sent out and the planners say, well, until we get all the referrals back, we can't go to the next step. And months go by as you wait for your project to keep moving, and it's frustrating. So at this point, we also are asked by the community to reach out to the public. And so you as a potential developer are now asked to do a public information meeting, a PIM, or an open house. And some jurisdictions will want you to do both. And these are where you rent a community room, you put all of your posters up, you stand around and people come in from the community and they walk around and look at your pictures and ask you a few questions, etc. And you share that. And so it's all about getting people to become comfortable with what it is that you're proposing to do. And usually sitting at the back of the room is one of the planners listening and hearing, trying to find out whether people are outraged about this application or whether they think it's pretty cool. Because they're going to use that as part of their own deliberation as to whether they want to support it or whether they want to see additional things happening. In the city of Nanaimo, there's a chap that goes to every one of these things, and all he ever talks about is what's the impact of parking on the street. Because we have concerns in our community about parking on the street. And so, that is an aspect that is addressed. And so, we are sensitive to Fred, and we make sure that we address those particular issues there. As you can see, at this point, we also get additional requirements. And so I mentioned the idea that we needed to bring on an expert. Because we were talking in the Kirkstone project about being able to do rainwater harvesting in there, they said, wow, this is a neat idea. Give us a report. So we went to the chap, and I don't know if many of you have ever gone to the Regional District in Nanaimo website, but there's a document on there called Best Practices Guide for Rainwater Harvesting. It's a free download of PDF, and it's a brilliant document prepared by Bob Burgess, and in fact my company contributed to the production of that as well, providing much of the graphics and some of the editing elements of it. But the nature of it is that this thing is being trumpeted as the best practices guide for rainwater harvesting by the Regional District in Nanaimo. So Bob Burgess provides his document saying, yes, we can do rainwater harvesting for the Kirkstone development. And the planner said, wow, that's really cool. Can you get another rainwater harvesting guy to read Bob Burgess's report on rainwater harvesting and give his opinion too? So you get this frustration in part there, but it leads to hiring additional professionals at times in order to make sure that you can prove all that you need there. So I see a question at the back.
I suspect this is a question that's been coming up in a lot of people's minds, and that's just, in listening, I just hear a lot of professionals involved, and as soon as I hear that, I hear a lot of money involved. When I think of sustainable communities, I'm also considering affordability, and I'm just wondering, how does one actually pay for all this? Most people getting into this don't necessarily have hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Even if you borrow money, I don't think you can get a mortgage for getting through red tape, per se, or a bank loan for getting through red tape. So just wondering, and we've done a lot of projects, so I'm still looking for solutions.
Yeah, I can tell you that that is an extremely frustrating thing that most of the people that I work with are involved in it. I can tell you though that when you go to the local government and you say to them, hey, you're breaking the bank, you're killing our project by the necessity of all of these extra things that you're asking for, give us a break. You know, you might get them being a little bit more sensitive about it. The other thing that if you're doing something that's innovative and sustainable, you might find that for many of these professionals, like myself, will step up and give a subsidized rate for a project like that simply to be associated with it, because it's a huge opportunity to address areas that is different than doing it conventional. So sometimes those costs aren't completely outrageous, but I appreciate your concern, and it is expressed all the time about that. We'll come back to that later in this discussion. So effectively then, we are now moving forward into what's called the Planning Committee review in there, and at that point, the board or council has a chance to look at it, and they've got some feedback from the reports that they've read, from the public information meetings, and they're going, you know what? This project, the way you've drawn it up, we're just not going to be able to support this. So they send you back, and this feedback loop goes back to concept, and you refine a few things, and then you bring it forward again, and hopefully at the second time, you know, you're good going through. And so once the planning committee review has been done, and they say, hey, you know what, we really like this. You know, this is well thought out. And quite honestly, if you do it with the charrette, and you create a good concept, and you've spoken to the different agencies, quite often it does go through. And then the next step with the Local Government Act is you get what's called first and second reading. And so the board and council have to review it, and they say, okay, well, we'll get first reading and second reading, and I don't know why they haven't combined them into one, but they're always done in the same meeting anyway. But there is elements within the Local Government Act where they can be done as separate aspects in there. So once you've gone through first and second reading, then that leads to a very important aspect, which is called the public hearing. And the public hearing is perhaps the biggest, most fundamental chance for the community to kill an application. And so what you get in a situation like that, it's very formal. You have people filling out on a list, and then you come to the podium and you say, my name is Bob Smith, and I live on such and such an address, because they always want to know where you're at. And then you say, I'm in favor of it because of this, this, and this. Or I'm opposed to it because of this, this, and this. And so this parade of individuals comes forward. You don't come up and say, Bob, his ideas are nuts, so you don't listen to him. You have to basically give your opinion. It's very formal. There's not a chance to come up and say, gee, I'd like to ask some questions. They generally refrain from that. They want your opinion as to whether you support it or not. And somebody could come all the way from Victoria up to a project in Qualicum and say, you know, yeah, we don't like this project. And they won't give much weight to the person that's come from Victoria. But the guy that's on the property right next door that says, I don't like this project because of this, this, and this, that will have a lot of weight with the people who are making the decisions. And so it's very important in the early stages that you are talking to your neighbors, respecting their concerns, and addressing them in the nature of your concept. So the public hearing process becomes very formal, and it lists out what the ideas are there. And then you go to third reading, and this, in some situations, where a council sits in on the entire public hearing, they'll do the third reading right then and there. And they'll say, you know what, nobody spoke against this, so we're prepared to move it forward. And generally they have three options at the third reading. They can say, we support it as is, we don't like it at all, or we support it subject to this, this, and this. And so at that point, you're making some concessions into the nature of what you're prepared to do. And if you're willing to do that, then you will get your support to move forward. And that tends to be the one that's most common. And then you get what's referred to as the time between third and fourth reading. Fourth reading being when adoption takes place. And so at this point, you get all of the various conditions. So for instance, if you needed to establish a covenant that protected where the septic field is, you have to get your lawyer on top of it. He needs to write the covenant, needs to be reviewed and approved by the regional district staff. It then gets sent down to land titles, it gets registered against the property, and so this becomes like one of the conditions. And so there might be easements, there might be right-of-ways, or covenants, there might be a variety of other concerns, including an approved development permit or approvals from provincial governments. And therefore, this is why at third reading, you now start some additional applications in there where you are actually going for your development permit. This might be the issues around environmental protection or about floodplain or aquifer protection in some situations in there. So you start that process there. So there's a little bit of an overlap in the processes that you're going to go through there. And then effectively, when all of those conditions are done, then you get fourth reading. With fourth reading, then effectively that is adoption, and you are now given the opportunity that you can go back and now you start your detailed design of your buildings, your structures, your community, and the nature of what you're proposing to do there, which leads to getting your building permits and starting construction. So in the case of a zoning amendment, you can almost plan for that to be about a year-long process. So it can be, it can be onerous in some situations. I've seen them as short as 6 months, but don't plan on anything really less than that. And, as I mentioned, you may also be going for strata subdivision, or you might be going for a regular subdivision. So you have other applications that are happening, and you have the ability to run some of them concurrent as well. So, my friend,
Hello, Jack. Hi.
how you doing?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Good to see you again. I think that my question, I think is somewhat in the spirit of the question that we just had from the back, my impression is that the process that you outlined to us here is perhaps most people, as I am just now, might see it as appropriate to a project of the scope of the Kirkstone project that you've been telling us about. But I had the impression from the conversations that we had here a week ago that many people were thinking, more in terms of a group, maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 friends, maybe couples who were looking at a way to come together and share a property, and just trying to keep it simple. And so I guess maybe simple is the key word.
Ultimately,
which is really, seems to be quite different, hopefully, from the process.
And it's not my intent to try to scare everybody and say, oh, you know what, let's just forget that whole idea. All I'm saying is the reality is that if you found a piece of property that you want to do something on, and the existing zoning doesn't support it, then you will need to go through a process like this in order to get it. Something that I've shown here, I've used it more in the context of a large community development such as Kirkstone, which is, targeting 35 homes, within that development. If it's a smaller scale one and involves, it may be much easier to go through in terms of that process, Joan. So in that sense, don't be, assume that it is all as detailed and as complicated as that, because many of them may be much easier. Another question.
Is there any current zoning out there that does support something like how, or should we expect that any property that we find, basically, or at least 9 out of 10 properties, we would need to change the zoning to support a plan of like 5 to 10 families on the property?
Yeah. So effectively, and I'm going to come back to that very specifically because I want to talk to it in the context of the tiny home communities and that movement in particular about it. But ultimately, you know, if you look at many zoning bylaws, it's like one page in a document, and it says, you know, in this case, I grabbed rural 4 from the regional district in Nanaimo. At the top of it, it lists a half a dozen permitted uses: agriculture, aquaculture, domestic industry, home occupation, produce stand, residential use, and silviculture. That's all that is permitted on that residential piece of property. The next thing it gets into is the next category in the zone of rural 4 is how many dwelling units per parcel. If you are on an area of 2 hectares or less, you're allowed 1 dwelling unit. If you are on an area greater than 2, you're allowed 2. In the case of a community where you're talking about 6, that isn't going to fit on a rural 4 zone in there. You know, other aspects in here are the parcel coverage, the maximum building height, the setbacks to property lines. These are all aspects that you need to take into consideration on that. But I'm going to come back a little bit here in a minute to talk about that sort of specific question. I can also point out that the RDN has 1 page, and I just started a project for someone in Vernon, and here's the zoning for 1 lot, and it's a 14-page document for 1 zone called non-urban zone.
That says it all.
Yeah, and they have written and prescribed absolutely everything you could possibly think about in there in 14 pages, and of course that's effectively what you're doing. So, you know, a unique aspect of this, and I just want to share it in the context of Brandy Gallagher's project. There's a zoning designation when we look at something like a rural 4, and you look and you say, there's no zoning that exists in here that I can change my property to, because every property has already got a zoning designation on it. So you look at it and say, well, what am I going to do? There's nothing in here that will allow 8 homes, you know, in a cluster on a piece of property. We don't have that. So what are you going to apply for? So what you apply for is what's called a comprehensive development zone. It's a zone custom fit for that specific piece of property. And in that, you say, we want this piece of property to have, you know, 8 homes on it, and this is the maximum size of the homes, and you can put all those parameters in there, and you create that comprehensive development zone. And the zone is applicable to 1 lot in the entire regional district. Really unique to the fact in the process that we did at our eco-village is that we started out with a CD zone. We're talking about the first eco-village in Canada. So we were working and we had the whole CD zone, and when we got to the end of it, we were discussing what we were going to call this CD zone. And their comment to us was, we like this zone so much that we wanted to see it replicated throughout the Cowichan Valley, so we're actually just going to call it Rural 5. And so they actually made it a zone that would be easier for other people to get, as opposed to one that is site-specific to just that property. So they're actually encouraging people to replicate that elsewhere, which is extremely exciting to me that they recognize that at the planning department.
And there's no R5 properties out there, it's something that you can apply for.
That's right, you know, and there it would be easier to go from an R4 to an R5 if the parameters weren't that much different. And we'll talk a little bit about some of that as I go on into the next step here. But this was the point that I was thinking, that if people wanted to chat for a couple of minutes amongst each other or use the facilities or whatever you need, we'll just take a 5-minute break here just so you can clear your head of that, because we're going to get into some more funner topics.
Oh, I freaked out.